Years ago, man am I old, but let's say the mid-1990s, I worked as a woodland firefighter while in the Army Reserves. I worked as a spotter. Basically, I was stationed in a giant fire tower in the middle of a national park. My job was just as it sounds. I would use binoculars and look out for fire, smoke, and other telltale signs of fire. My nearest compadre was 5 miles or so from me. My days consisted of working my shift, taking long walks around the fire tower, being on the lookout for anyone who might be having illegal fires, looking out for wildlife, and staying afoot of bears and wolves. The way that our shifts worked back then was 1 week on, 1 week off. So we slept in the towers, cooked our food, etc. And there were nearby toilets and showers for when we needed them. One day, I came across an illegal bear trap. I had several ranger friends and I safely set off the trap and then picked it up to take it to the ranger station on one of my treks out for food in my Jeep. Poaching is illegal in the park, and it carried a big fine even back then, and some jail time. But it didn't stop the poachers from trying. I heard rifle shots and I headed back for my fire tower. We did have a rifle in the tower to be used in case of emergencies. Just a few months back, a fellow spotter had been mauled to death by a grizzly, so each tower had been outfitted with a rifle. I looked with my binoculars but did not see anything out of the ordinary. I radioed my coworker Ben, an older guy in the adjacent tower. He hadn't heard anything today but had come across a few traps himself. That night, after a dinner of franken beans and toast, I was writing to my future wife when I heard the rumbling of a truck. Thinking that it may be Ben, occasionally he would make the trek over. We would crack open a soda and chew the fat for a bit. But instead, I saw 4 men with rifles get out of the truck. One looked around and leaned up against the truck while the other 3 grabbed traps and began to set them up. I grabbed the rifle and my lantern and headed down the stairs. I was only 21, a farmer's son from a rural Virginia farming town, and even with 1 deployment behind me, I was naive. I should have called it in to the other rangers, but instead, thought that I could talk some sense into 4 dangerous men. I barely got a, "Hey, what are you doing?" out of my mouth before I was roughly shoved by rough hands. My lantern fell and I heard it crack. The rifle was kicked away from me and I felt the breath leave my chest when I was violently kicked in the stomach. I barely had caught my breath when I was grabbed by 2 of the men and was shoved forward into the woods. It seemed like we had walked for many miles, but in reality, it was probably only 1. However, I noticed that there were no sounds. In the forest, it is rarely silent. It's a cacophony of sounds even at night. Owls, the wolves, crickets. But on this night, nothing. Suddenly, I was shoved onto my knees and I felt hot tears well up. I thought of my parents, my little sister and brother and my fiance who were back home in Virginia. I heard the rack of a gun and shut my eyes and prayed. But suddenly, the night erupted. However, it was these sounds of sirens, those of the forest rangers, and behind them in his pickup, Ben, who had tried to radio me that he had heard a car's engine and came to my tower when I didn't reply. The poachers were arrested, and Ben drove me back to the tower. I was still shaking. He didn't lay into me for not following procedure, just said, "That was close, kid." I ended up leaving the job months later to take a job closer to home, but I never ran into any more poachers during the rest of my time. I kept in contact with Ben for a while, sent him a wedding invite and then a photo of my firstborn son in '97. However, as time usually does, we lost track of one another, and a few years back I googled him. He would have been 75 or so to discover that he had passed away a few years back. I don't know whatever came of those poachers, but I know I never want to meet them again. Rewind to my year in 4th or 5th grade, and I'm turning 19 soon now. My grandmother from Alaska had drove her motorhome down. I'm in Florida, and she had brought her beagle, Ginger. My friends and they were my siblings lived about a 10 to 15 minute walk away from my house, and I wanted to show them my grandma's dog since I was already taking her out for a walk. I had gotten about 5 minutes from my house, so literally just down the road a little bit, and I crossed the main drag. A little bit further down is a church. My house at the time and the church's property were bordering each other. I'm on the opposite side of the road where the church is located, and there's a small circle driveway. So Ginger stopped to smell some bushes, and I'm just like, okay, get a smell and we can go. But then a guy in a white truck with a small trailer pulls in and parks there, and I don't really think anything of it. He gets out of the car and leaves the door open. I look over, and there's a girl maybe 7 or 8 in the passenger seat. Her knees are against her chest and she looks scared. The guy hollers at me from across the street, so naturally I look over. He says, "Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you," over and over again, and then he starts crossing the road. I'm starting to freak out, and I start pulling Ginger's leash, but she is way into this bush and won't budge. He gets halfway across and there are no cars, and he asks me the most bizarre thing that I've ever heard. "Do you know anybody that's selling babies?" I look to the side, really anxiously trying to think of some kind of lie to get him to go down the street, or something just to get him away from me. I ended up saying, no, sorry. And Ginger finally was done, so I started to book it back home. He left and said nothing else and drove away. I totally forgot about the girl in the truck. I'm walking across the street back home, and some guy in a bug exterminator truck tells me that he saw what happened and asked me if I was okay. I just say yes, still being creeped out about talking to literally anybody else, and now a second guy shows up. He left shortly after, and I walked into my house and told my mom and grandmother. They were horrified that it had happened so close and they had no idea. My mom called the police and they took a description from me via the phone, but it was really bad because all I knew was that he was a little bit taller than me at the time, maybe 30, and he had a white truck and a trailer. I remember my stepdad pulling up people who got arrested recently and asked me if I had recognized any of them. Of course I didn't though. Years later, and I really hope that girl is doing fine, and I just hope that was his daughter being really creeped out by him. Also, I hope no other kids got to talk to him. It was a really nerve-wracking experience. For background, my family moved to the countryside from the city when I was about 7 years old, and I'm 21 now. Both my parents had grown up in the suburbs and had lived in the capital of our state for about 10 years before we had moved. It definitely took us some time to get used to the train tracks that ran by our house, the wild animals, the weird but kind neighbors, and the odd visitors. Another thing is that you have to get off the main road and turn onto a long gravel drive to get up to our house. We can see the entire length of the driveway from certain points in our yard, which is about 3 acres. A few years after we had moved in, my dad got a promotion at work, and as a result, started to go to conferences and business trips that lasted from a few days to a week, at least a couple of times a year. My mom felt nervous about being home alone with 2 young kids. I was 10 and my brother was 6, and so we decided to get a dog. We knew that we wanted a big dog, but something that would be gentle with my brother and I. After a few weeks looking at shelters, we took home Rocky. He was about 9 months when we took him home, and dirty, pushing 70 pounds. We believe that he was a German Shepherd mix with some northern or mountain breed. We aren't sure to this day, but he's a massive red-colored dog with a long black muzzle and ears, a fluffy tail that he carries over his back, and a white stripe up his nose. It wasn't long until he was 100 pounds, and an absolute force to be reckoned with. Even though he was very gentle with both my sister and I, loved our cats and was a big ball of joy around everyone we brought into our house, he tended to be very territorial and aggressive with other dogs, and very protective of us, especially of my mom and I. Once the electric company came to do work on the telephone poles on our property without telling us at first, and after 20 minutes they finally had to call us because Rocky had trapped them in their truck and was jumping up and barking at their windows. I doubt he would have really attacked them if they had gotten out of their trucks, but it was more than enough to make them think twice. This protective instinct came in very, very handy one day. It was summertime and my dad was at work and my mom was home with my brother and I, since she was a teacher and off for the summer with us. My mom was working in our garden, and my brother and I were playing close by, with Rocky watching over all of us. Rocky all of a sudden sounded the alarm, throwing his head up in the air and barking and howling. He makes a deep woo-woo noise. I looked up to see a dirty white pickup truck pull off from the main road and into our driveway. This wasn't necessarily alarming at first, as people sometimes used our driveway to turn around when they got lost. But the white pickup slowly ambled up our drive, and I could see something strange in the bed. It was lumpy and discolored, but I couldn't really tell what it was until he pulled all the way up to our house, where our other cars were, and honked the horn to get our attention. It was meat. Giant red chunks of meat with some of the limbs of various animals still attached. It was the creepiest thing that I had ever seen in my life. Just a grizzled, scraggly man in his early 50s, driving a pickup truck full of meat in the southern July heat. I immediately just got a really, really bad vibe from this guy, and I remember my mom telling my brother and I to go inside, and we did, but we watched out the glass door. Rocky had surprisingly been quiet at that point, but was now next to my mom, and she had her hand around his collar. The guy rolled down his window and asked my mom if she wanted to purchase some meat. My mom said no and to please leave our property. Instead, he went on about the different types of meat, and asking how much we wanted. Beef, venison, pork, etc. My mom asked him to leave again, but instead he decided to get out of the nasty white pickup. As soon as his feet were on the ground, Rocky went ballistic, barking and snarling. This finally made the guy stop. He looked at Rocky, looked at my mom, and then asked, "Does your dog bite?" And my mom, deathly serious, replied, "Only if I tell him to." The guy took one more look at Rocky and I'm guessing decided not to mess with the giant, snarling beast. He got back in his truck, backed up, and headed back down our driveway. I don't know if he really was selling the meat or not, but apparently he had been around to our neighbors as well, who had also gotten a really bad vibe from him. We'll never know what he was really up to with those giant slabs of meat in the bed of his pickup truck. Maybe he was just a weird guy trying to sell some sketchy meat. Maybe he was looking for something else. We never saw the meat man, as we started to call him, again though. To this day, Rocky is still kicking it, by the way. He's almost 15 and now he's completely deaf. But he's still out in the yard on summer days, watching over us. A few years ago, I entered the University of Lausanne to start my medical studies. I had just arrived in the city and even the country. I was very excited to start my year, to discover the university and to meet new people. Everything was going great until the end of the third week. Friday night around 9 p.m., I leave the library, say goodbye to my friends, and start to go home. The pace of work was already very intense, so we had been working all day and I was in a rush to get home. It was my favorite part of the day because I could put on my music, take the subway and then the train, and it gives me a chance to rest and unwind. Anyway, that night it was cold, so there was no one left outside. It takes me about 7 minutes to walk from the library to the subway. I'm walking quietly with my music in my ears when all of a sudden, I get a shiver that runs through my body from head to toe. I start to feel uncomfortable, as if someone was watching me, and at that point, I pause my music and decide to not turn around to check in case the person is trying to be really inconspicuous, and if I notice them, something might happen. I don't want to run either because I'm not sure if I can run faster and I don't know where to go. At this point, we pass a glass building, so I decide to look inside and pretend that I'm fixing my hair. I quickly glance in the corner of my eye and my blood runs cold. There is definitely someone walking a few feet behind me in a hoodie. I try to reassure myself that he had just finished work and that he's going home, that he's cold and that's why he's wearing his hoodie. But I didn't see a backpack, and there are no houses for civilians around. I decide to send a message to my mother saying, "Come and get me in front of the building. Please, I really don't feel it." It is important to know that the university is about 30 minutes by car from my house. At this moment, I don't find any other solution than taking refuge in a building while waiting for my mother to come and get me. As I was about to go back, I opened the door, took off my helmet, and went down these stairs to find a hiding place. We had entered by the third floor. I thought that I was out of trouble when suddenly, I hear the door that I came in through open up. This time, I'm sure that he's after me, but since I'm new, I didn't know this building and where it led to. I run downstairs at full speed and I hear behind me the footsteps of this guy running down the stairs at full speed as well. I run without looking, being sure that he is running faster than me and that he'll catch up with me. I don't even know where I'm going, but I pray that I don't fall into a dead end. Looking back, I even think that it was really like in The Shining with the labyrinth scene. I didn't know how far ahead of him I was, so I opened a window in the hallway to make it look like I was out of there, and I opened a door a little further. It was a huge auditorium in the dark. I went down the stairs and hid under a desk in the middle, and I put my phone on silent. My mom had been texting me a lot asking me what was going on, and saying that she was on her way with my dad. I texted her, "I am in the name of this building, and he's looking for me, please come quickly." I hid under that desk thinking that I was screwed. My hiding place sucked and he was going to find me any second. But then I heard a thud and a huge scream, and I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life as when I heard that scream. For 15 minutes, my mother was sending me messages, telling me to hang on. And at the end of those 15 long minutes waiting for him to find me, I finally got the message from my mom where she says that she is here with the police, that they're going to enter the building and that they need to know where I am. I just tell them that I'm on the second floor because I had no idea what room I was in, or which way I was going. After 2 minutes, I hear the door of the auditorium, and it was the police that came to get me. Once I got out, they took my statement and said that they would check with the university management. The next day, they contacted us and said that they saw on these surveillance cameras that there was indeed someone who had followed me when I had entered the building, but there were no cameras inside. You can't see the guy's face and therefore you don't know who it is. They just said that security was going to do patrols at night and advised me to have someone with me when I went out at that time. We never heard about it again, and that's good.